Hi everyone, this is BritSimon. Since the Visa Bulletin was published, I've been getting a lot of questions and a lot of concerns about why the Visa Bulletin was frozen, why it was the same this month for the month of February interviews as it was last month for the interviews scheduled to be in January. Some people have been suggesting that that's the effect of Trump. Somehow Trump is slowing down the process, etc. Others are just sort of wondering what the situation is. So I thought what I'd do is just sort of address that for you and just talk about some factors that that you should consider before sort of losing your mind and panicking. Let's just talk about the sort of the obvious one, right? Trump. Trump is not the president of the USA yet. He's not. There is nothing legally that he can do that influences the Visa Bulletin or anything else, frankly, in government at this time. He won't be sworn in as president of the USA until January the 20th, 2025. So he has got no way of influencing the Visa Bulletin, changing how things are working, etc. So there is nothing to do with Trump in terms of the way the Visa Bulletin has just been released. Okay, that's very simple. That should be very obvious to most of you, and so we can just put that one to bed. Okay, that's just not the reasoning. But let's just talk about what could be happening. And let me just do something. I want to show you. I want to show you some data that will sort of make this clear. A couple of things that I want to make the point about. Firstly, let me just show you my screen here. This is the Visa Bulletin that we're talking about, and the numbers in this section for February interviews didn't change at all from the previous month, and that's disappointing. We all like to see nice progress being made, etc., but it's not the end of the world, and so we've got to be a little bit, cautious before we start panicking about these things. So let me just show you a couple of things that should sort of make stuff a little bit more obvious. The first point that I want to make to you is that the normal situation is that the first few months of the year is not when the work is done. It's not when most of the visas are issued, etc. There's normally a pretty low pace of visa issuance in the first few months of the year. And if you look at any particular year, if you come to Zarthisius's site, you'll see evidence of that. So, for example, in DV 2024, I have DV 24 here. As you can see, in October, there were less than 2,000 visas issued in that month. In November, just slightly above 2,000. In December, just slightly above 2,000. And it's not until January and February and March that you see some sort of increase. But even those sort of middle months are not particularly busy compared to the red line that you see in these later months, which is the busier months of July, August, September. Most of the visas are issued towards the end of the program. Now, that's not entirely because most of the interviews are scheduled towards the end of the program. It's partly also because cases on 221G or administrative processing tend to get cleared up before the end of the year, right? And so during the whole year, there is a bit of a build-up of 221G cases, and they try and clear those out. And so that accelerates the pace of issuance towards the end of the year. But if we also look at, I've just did a quick little sort of count up here. And I counted I bucketed the 2NLs that were received for each month of interviews. The first month I've labeled month 0 because that's the first time we get the data. Now, in DV 2025, on January the 1st, we will have access to the DV 2025 data. At that point, all of the interviews will have been processed for October, November, December, And almost all of the cases, probably all of the cases that are scheduled for January and February, are also in that first set of data that we get. It's already in there, right? Because the SEAC system is working right now, but it's not available for us to look at. And it only becomes available for us to look at on January the 1st. So on January the 1st, we will get to see how many interviews have been scheduled for 5 months and how many interviews have been held for 3 months, right? And so when we look at that data from last year, we see that the number of scheduled interviews at the point January the 1st of 2024 for DV 2024, there were 10,721 cases which have either been scheduled or had been interviewed, right? They had been scheduled at least. And so that's an average in each month of just over 2,100 cases per month for those 5 months, right? 5 months of scheduling. And then if you look at the later months, the later months are all above that number. So that covers, that 10,700 number covers cases up until February. And then for March interviews, there were 2,800. For April interviews, there were 24, nearly 2,500. For May, 2,557. For June, 2,881. For July, 3,785. August had 3,576. And then the busiest month in terms of scheduled interviews was September, 3,927 cases, right? All of those months are higher than the average number of cases in the first 5 months of the year in terms of scheduling. Okay, this is in DV 2024, and we can expect the same pattern this year also. So the first few months of the year are not when we see the major number of interviews being scheduled, and it's not when we see the major number of cases being approved and issued. Okay, so we're not losing anything with a quiet start to the year. That is normal. Okay, and that's one thing I wanted to get across to you. It's normal that we start slow like that. Okay. Now the other thing that I want to explain to you, and let me just, if I just look on BritSimonSays.com. Yeah, no, not there. Hang on, not that page. Hold on. Go to the public-facing page. Okay, if we go to my website here and we look at the Visa Bulletin numbers, the other thing that you might want to say is, well, okay, did the Visa Bulletin move at this pace before, right? And so you can see that historically. I've tracked all of the numbers going back years, right? So if you look at the position of where we are now, for Europe, we're at 12,000 this year. We're at 13,500 last year, okay? 15,000 the year before, 13,000 the year before that, right? And in 2021, the numbers were quite low. That's Europe. In Africa, if we have a look at Africa, we're only slightly behind where we were last year in terms of the numbers. And remember, the numbers went to a higher point last year. They were, we had cases up to 122,000. So they were more spread out in a sense. So we're slightly behind last year, but nothing dramatic. We're a little bit more behind where we were in February, but nothing really to sort of, really panic about. For Asia, it's the same. January and February at 5,500. Last year, January and February were 5,500. It's the same, right? Nothing to panic about there. Let's have a look at South America. In South America is ahead of last year's number, okay? And although it stayed the same for those months, it started off very high, right? And then it jumped a lot in for January interviews and then stayed the same again. Oceania, similar sort of story. It started off high. It's now at 1,100, but if we look at last year or the year before, it's in line with previous years, right? Nothing to worry about there. So I've told you two things so far. Number one, we shouldn't expect the beginning of the year to be that busy in terms of numbers of interviews or number of visas issued. That's just the way it normally is. Number two, the numbers that we've got in the Visa Bulletin are roughly in line with previous years anyway, right? And in reality, they started off quite quickly with quite high numbers, and then we had a fairly big jump in for the January numbers, etc. And so we've had a couple of repeated months. Not a big deal, nothing to get worked up about. But there is one other aspect I want to explain to you as well, and it's this. And you can see this probably easier with the EU chart from 24. If you look at any year's chart of data, you get a pattern for the big three regions, which is Africa, Asia, and EU, right? You get a pattern where the density of cases, the number of cases per 1,000 cases that are real as opposed to holes, right, tends to be the density tends to be higher in the beginning numbers, and then there is a sort of a decline of the density as the numbers go through the range here. So if we look at EU last year, EU had, roughly speaking, that blue color there is holes. Okay, so roughly speaking, about 50% of the cases at the beginning, up until about 17,000 in DV 2024, were holes, and about 50% of the cases were real cases, right? And then the density dropped after Uzbekistan, I believe, is the big reason for the drop last year. There were no cases from Uzbekistan above 17,000. And so then the density drops down to a rough number around about sort of 38%, and then later it drops down again, and it ends up later on at being something like 75% of holes and 25% real cases. In other words, the beginning density, the number of cases, real cases per 1,000 for EU in DV 2024 was about double the number of cases per 1,000 in the beginning number ranges than it was in the later ranges. What does that mean? What that means is that when the Visa Bulletin moves later in the year, we can see bigger number increases later in the year for the same number of cases, right? So let's say they want to reveal 1,000 cases, I'm just picking a number. If they want to reveal 1,000 cases in the early numbers, they would have to move the Visa Bulletin by 2,000 numbers to have even 1,000 real cases, right? In the later part of the EU numbers, they would have had to have moved the Visa Bulletin by 4,000 case numbers in order to reveal 1,000 cases, because there are more holes and less cases in the later numbers. The same thing could be said for Asia. You can see here in Asia the density starts higher, which is up until the point where Nepal was limited, and then there's a drop down to up until the point to when Iran was limited, and then the density for the rest of Asia, that is to say not Iran and not Nepal, the density is lower, and roughly again half of the density of the beginning numbers, right? You see a bit of a theme happening here. It's the same in Africa as well. Density begins in DV 2024 at around about 40% or 60% holes, and then we end up at about 17%, so less than half the density of the beginning number ranges. All right, so as the numbers increase, the Visa Bulletin can move faster in the later months because the density of cases is lower in the later numbers, right? So we've got three factors so far, which are all factors that you should consider before you start freaking out, right? And so the Visa Bulletin numbers are not that much different to previous years. The amount of cases interviewed at the beginning of the year is not as many as those cases being interviewed at the end of the year. They always have a slow start. And thirdly, as you can see from the data here, the three big regions have a declining density, which means that the Visa Bulletin can move faster in later months when the number is higher. So those are important factors you should consider. Now, there are some things that I'm seeing that I'm slightly concerned about. I do think, just as a rough guess, it appears to me that DS260 processing is going slower this year than in previous years. That has an effect on the way the Visa Bulletin moves. Actually, if there were less cases processed, the Visa Bulletin should actually move faster. But I do believe there are less cases processed, and it's sort of somewhat holding us back a little bit in a sense. But when they keep the number the same, let's say they had Africa at 22,500, and they chose not to increase the Visa Bulletin number. That doesn't mean that they revealed no cases for February interviews. What it means is that more of those cases that were already current for January now are still current for February, but there's more chance of more cases having their DS260 processed and therefore could be scheduled. Okay, so I do think that DS260 processing has been slower. And I also think that there are some signs, although we don't have any data to back this up, there are some signs that some of the embassies are a little bit slower in scheduling, and they've got off to a slow start. That's not particularly disastrous. That's okay. All right. Bear in mind also in DV 2025, there are going to be less visas issued in DV 2025 than we saw in DV 2024, because there are about 3,000 visas have been taken out for another program to do with NICARA and the National Defense Act. So we only have a maximum number of visas of around about 52,000, as opposed to the 55,000 that we had in DV 2024. Okay, so there is less work for them to do. There's less visas to issue, and for the various factors that I've explained to you, there's really nothing to worry about at this point in terms of the Visa Bulletin moving slowly. You don't need to worry about that. Hopefully next month it will return to some sort of forward progression. We'll see some increases, and you can relax. But for those people waiting for their interview at the moment, don't forget, you need 3 things in order to get your interview. Your case number has to be current. That is always true. But your DS260 has to be processed. Okay, and you can find out whether your DS260 is processed or not by emailing KCC. They will tell you. And the third thing that you need is your embassy needs to have the capacity for your case, and for other cases that have gone before you, right? And so some of the embassies undoubtedly are building up a little bit of a backlog, and that can be more of a concern than other factors. But we won't know the data about that until January the 1st. So stay calm. Wait until we've got some data, and let's see how this thing goes. We have a lot of time left in the year. There's 7 full months of scheduling before the end of the year. So really no time, there's no need to panic at this point. Okay, I hope that was useful for you. I hope that's informative. Please do let me know if you've got any questions on this subject or other subjects. By all means, I'd be happy to answer those questions for you. Do make sure you're having a look at my blog and watching the YouTube videos that I've made available that explain many parts of this process. Okay, so make sure you're subscribed to my channel, and hopefully together we can get as many of you as possible with your green cards before the end of DV 2024. It remains to be seen what Trump will do. We'll have to see what he does. I do think he's going to slow some things in immigration in general, but it's not clear what specifically he will do that could impact the DV lottery program. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. There's nothing we can do but wait. Okay. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening today. Thanks, then. Bye-bye.